Guys, there's this little thing that's been bothering me about games for the past few years, and I finally decided to speak up about it. It's this little phenomenon that you just maybe may have heard of, called Eurocentrism. In many, it is a term that stirs up strong feelings. Wikipedia defines it as following. Eurocentrism refers to viewing the West as the center of world events or superior to other cultures. The exact scope of Eurocentrism varies from the entire Western world to just the continent of Europe, or even more narrowly to Western Europe, especially during the Cold War. When the term is applied historically, it may be used in reference to the presentation of the European perspective on history as objective or absolute, or to an apologetic stance towards European colonialism and other forms of imperialism. Now, the last few centuries especially saw its apogee, with the full-blown European and US imperialistic ambitions coming to fruition. However, now we're in the 21st century and the Eurocentric ideals are long out of fashion. I'm asking myself, why then are the European setting and history still so overrepresented in games? Let's take a closer look. As many of you probably know, the first game machines and computers were developed by Western countries. This led not just to them being able to seize the technological advantage, but also made Western audiences the first ones exposed to a new form of leisure time software in form of games. Back then, the developers more often than not did not look far for inspiration. Many games were prone to portray local or culturally similar motifs. These were considered to be the most appealing to the available customer base, as this base had been found to gravitate towards products they were already familiar with. So basic human behavior, choose what you already know. Back then, there was also not as easily accessible information on any and all matters as it is today, through the internet. So a game taking place in an unfamiliar setting would remain enigmatic for the buyer, thus losing a part of its appeal. The educational system also wasn't yet transformed into its modern rendition, as it still retained elements of cultural propaganda and focused even more profusely on the local heritage. That made the population cling more strongly to the national heritage and history, reluctant to dig into other histories. However, that was still in the 80s and 90s. Since then the world has undergone major shifts and changes. Soviet Union and with it the bipolar world have fallen, China and India are on the upswing, and most importantly for us gamers, computers have become available worldwide to a global audience. These days, the biggest customer markets for games alongside the US are countries along the likes of China, Japan, or even Mexico. Adjusting games according to these factors based on logic would make one assume that since the target audience has shifted, the games would have too. But in that you would be mostly incorrect. Most games are still geared towards a Western audience, even the ones from Nintendo, a world-renowned Japanese studio that is still putting on a mostly Western coat of paint. Think of characters like Luigi, Princess Peach, and so on and so forth. This unwillingness to change is definitely not caused by there not being enough inspiring stories or locations outside of Europe and the US. Many games have proven that they want to change their aesthetic and are experimenting with it, however, would still rather set Western characters into non-Western parts of the world than they would find the local protagonist. Think of the likes of Far Cry 4, if you are familiar with it. What I would mostly assume is the hurdle keeping the studios from branching out is their fear of not selling enough if they stray from their Western roots. There are definitely still many people online voicing their strong opinions how they want that one more game set in France, Rome or Great Britain, making the game studios scared of change. To these people, I have to point out that there is already a humongous library stuffed to the brim with games in the style they obsessively demand from the developers all the time. Go play them, if you like those sort of games. Give other foreign audiences an opportunity to experience their local history too. Don't hoard it for yourselves. And what you might know, maybe you will even enjoy the change of scenery a game tailored more towards non-European, non-US audience might offer. Let me give you a few examples of game series and studios not just being a part of this rather negative trend, but also how they realized it during the years and are trying to correct it in their more recent releases. I'm going to start off with my most beloved series, that being Age of Empires. I love this series to death, and it itself inspired a whole generation of history lovers. Up until recently, it was a chain of 3.5, if you consider Age of Mythology, games taking place in the antiquity, medieval times and colonial times respectively. The most popular of these, Age of Empires 2, a medieval era real-time strategy game, was at release in 1999, offering a roster of 13 civilizations, 7 of them being European. The civ variety expanded a lot during the years, even when the game was developed by a passionate fan group known as the Forgotten Empires, who added other civilizations from other parts of the world. The game received an official remaster in 2019, and more civilizations have followed ever since. Now the game boasts over 50 of them, with 21 civilizations being from Europe, and sadly only measly 2 in sub-Saharan Africa, those being the Malians and Ethiopians, the most common picks of African civilizations if any game wants to go for them. The units shared between these civilizations are also based on the medieval French army, leading to, for example, the Vietnamese being able to train arbaletiers, which were from a historical standpoint absolutely French. However, the team behind Age of Empires Remastered has attempted to correct the flaws of the past releases in the series and make amends in their most recent release, that being Age of Empires 4, released in 2021. This game, taking on a medieval setting too, was more successful in staying true to history and how the different civilizations are portrayed. Even units that share the same name across civilizations are graphically different based on local historical garments that were worn. Yet, there is still an issue to point out. Out of the 18 playable factions, 9 are representing Europe, even though geographically Europe is the second smallest continent. Out of these 18 factions, there is only 1 representing Africa, that of course being the Malians, 0 representing the Americas, 3 representing the Middle East, only 1 representing India, and the rest of these civilizations being found in East Asia. In any case, there is inarguably still a long way to go if the studio behind Age of Empires ever wants to achieve a non-biased portrayal of the world in any of their games. If we take a more big picture approach to historical gaming, we unavoidably find the industry giant, Paradox Studios. These guys are the unparalleled masters of the so-called map games, where the player takes over a country on a map of the world and manages it with a goal to survive and maybe even thrive. Their most known games are Hearts of Iron 4, Europa Universalis 4, Crusader Kings 3 and Victoria 3, each focusing on a different period and going in depth on a different aspect of country management. The easiest way to spot Eurocentric motifs in the games of this genre, apart from simply not including the world outside of Europe, looking at you Crusader Kings, is to take a look at the size of the smallest land divisions the player is able to interact with around the world. In the older titles, such as Europa Universalis 4 and Hearts of Iron 4, not speaking even of their predecessors, the difference in land division sizes is just blatantly obvious. As these locations are designed to fuel your economy, the non-European world, where singular locations take up more space, is predisposed to fall behind by developers. For no other reason, only because they wanted to make Europe more detailed and thus made it have higher location density. So basically, to explain this more easily, you have these locations that the map is comprised of, and these locations, there are more of them per certain area in places like Europe compared to places like Indonesia or even such cradles of civilization as China or the Middle East. The locations in, let's say, Germany are still denser. So to an area that maybe comprise 2 to 3 locations in Europe, the same size of area is just 1 location in Asia or even Africa. Don't get me started on Africa. Those locations there are just massive. This trend, sadly, but luckily in smaller scope, perseveres to their newer titles, those being Crusader Kings 3 and Victoria 3, However, playing outside of Europe is made much more fair and viable in these games. However, the hope to completely uproot the Eurocentric trend is now on the horizon, with Europa Universalis 5 releasing soon and promising a more detailed rendition of the world map, with much more attention being put outside of Europe than ever before. Crusader Kings 3 is also releasing an expansion this year that plans on adding the whole of East Asia to the map, making it more complete than ever before in the series, with not just the map but also the local governance systems being implemented into the game as some other forms of government. So let's say Southeast Asia has the mandala government, decentralized version of governance, home to that particular region. Stronghold series was until recently another one of those staunchly Eurocentric series, with its first debut in 2001. In this particular case, it could be argued that the game itself wasn't conceived to include other areas outside of Europe and crusading lands. But these arguments would fail instantly considering the studio's latest release, Stronghold Warlords, which focuses on China, in which we see this apparently industry-wide pivot to a more global setting, in most cases the aforementioned China or broader East Asia, as investors and studios realize the potential of an untapped market in these places. In the most recent years, the studio behind Stronghold, Firefly, has been remastering their old classics as well, during the process of which they also tweaked some gameplay elements of the old game to be more culturally conscious and appropriate. There is a rumor that another new mainline game is in the works for them, and I'm looking forward to what setting it opts for. Assassin's Creed. Now, this is a more different type of game compared to all the aforementioned ones, but I want to show Eurocentrism not just within a certain genre, but as an industry-wide problem, and Assassin's Creed is a great poster child for this. So, it's an RPG game where player takes control of a certain character. These are usually individuals who are part of the Order of Assassins. Most of the time it boasts an immersive world, meticulously crafted to relay, communicate the place and time the game is set in. Because of this attention to detail, the game is surprisingly often recommended as a learning material by many history teachers. However, if we look at what places have been chosen for the individual games, we come to the conclusion that what is presented as a worldwide organization of the Assassins has the vast majority of its stories taking place in Europe and the US. From the stunning 14 mainline games, 6 are set directly in Europe, 2 on the edges of it, that being Constantinople and the Crusader lands during the Crusades. 3 are set mostly in the US, and the 3 outliers are Black Flag set in the Caribbean, Origins set in Greek Egypt, that being the Egypt after Alexander's conquest, so there's still some elements of Europe's influence, it's Europeanized Egypt. And the newest and latest game from the series, Assassin's Creed Shadows, also joining the East Asia trend, being set in Japan. The next mainline game set to release is however set back on the good old continent, particularly in Germany. As the studio behind Assassin's Creed series, Ubisoft, is more on the controversial side of things for years now, I wouldn't expect them to be the ones doing any breakthroughs in this matter. There are many other cases of European overrepresentation in games, especially its medieval timeframe, such as Manor Lords, Kingdom Come Deliverance, Knights of Honor, and so on and so forth. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying these games are bad. These games, some of them, most of them that I mentioned, are masterpieces. It's just that they have this slight tendency towards overrepresenting Europe, which might be considered a minor flaw in most cases. It's not something that makes or breaks the game. It's just something to consider while planning to make, planning to develop, planning to put out a game. And also for the players to think about it. But by naming all these other examples of games set in Europe, I just want you, the listener, to realize how many games with European aesthetic there really are in comparison with, let's say, games set in India or the whole massive continent of Africa. Those are some really unpleasant statistics to look at. Instead of these fresh settings, what we get once and again is medieval Europe, Rome, Greece or World War II. Now, After I complained about every single historical series under the sun, you might be asked, why is it even important to spread the focus of games more evenly across the globe? Well, come to think about it, it's honestly quite simple. In real life, people exposed to other cultures regularly tend to be way more tolerant towards other people and cultures. We see this especially nowadays, for example in Europe, the bigger cities vote more progressively because they live in an inherently more multicultural environment than people from villages, making people from cities more tolerant and more open to new ideas. Now, considering this, games set in different places and times to the one that we experience in our day-to-day lives have the same effect on the player as being exposed to a multicultural society in real life, even though probably not to that degree. Producing more varied games not only makes the stories and gameplay that much more fresh and flavorful, in contrast to seeing friends for the gazillionth time. Man, I'm so full of friends. A varied gaming landscape also indirectly contributes a great deal towards forming a more tolerant population as a whole. On one final note, I would like to say that this decade we live in, that being the 20s, is beginning to be viewed by many as the one during which a new wave of non-Western studios will rise and produce the next all-time hits. The eye-opening release of a masterpiece of a game called Black Myth Wukong has led many to realize the sheer potential that these newer, not Eurocentric studios bring to the table. That was all for me. If you liked the video, hit the like button, give a sub so you don't miss anything, and be sure to voice your spicy opinions in the comments. I'm so looking forward to reading them. Thank you all for watching and have a nice one. Bye.